Hi, my name is Chris Brayton. I'm the Deputy Site Lead for Inyari Mana Ilgari Bundra, CSIRO's Murchison Radio Astronomy Observatory. And I just want to start off by giving an acknowledgement to the traditional owners that we're across Australia, that where we host our facilities. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their continuing connection and custodianship of lands, seas and waters throughout Australia. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, on whose lands we are meeting today. I'd also like to particularly call out and acknowledge the Wadjuri Yamaji as the traditional owners of the observatory where MWA is located. Right, so just a little bit of housekeeping for everyone this afternoon. In the event of an evacuation, there'll be two tones that sound. The first tone is an alert tone. The second tone is an evacuation tone. Your nearest exit point is right there, with a muster point that is located outside the near the car park entrance, near the large sign at the front of the building. If you're in need of first aid or if you're feeling ill, please see our reception desk and someone will look after you. Also, as I've been alerted to, apparently the ATNF Twitter for CSIRO has given a shout out to MWA as part of its 10th anniversary, slightly mocking Twitter too. So part of what I'm going to do today is just give everyone a bit of a brief run through of the observatory itself, what we do on site, the way we work with the local traditional owners and its location and things like that. So recently, as you're probably aware, that the observatory has now expanded out to the full size of the former Bellardi station. So it's increased by 27 times. So it's over 345,000 hectares of land that we have to manage now. So just a little bit smaller than Perth, but not by much. So if we're actually to drive up there from now, you're looking at about a 900-kilometre drive from here, which takes roughly about 9.5 hours, or 375 kilometres northeast of Geraldton, or about a 4-hour drive from Geraldton. So definitely a big place. If I was to drive from the southernmost point of the observatory up to the northernmost point, it'd take me about an hour and a half on some dirt roads. So pretty big place. Just like to talk about a little bit about the Wadjuri Yamaji. The Wadjuri Yamaji community and its forebearers have lived and cared for and been occupiers and custodians of this land for thousands of years. Their living culture and unique role in the life of the region is acknowledged and is one of the keys to the success of the observatory. Without that relationship, we'd not be able to successfully deliver upon some of the ambitions that we have for the future of the observatory. Protection of the Wadjuri heritage on site is one of our major priorities, and we promise to protect and preserve their cultural heritage during the operation of the observatory and especially during the construction of the SKA Low telescope. Our new observatory, our new allure was negotiated for the whole station and enabled it to become a much larger part of the Murchison region. And this is going to help us establish some opportunities going forward with the Wadjuri for the next 50 years, so being the whole life of the observatory. Last year, as everyone's aware, we concluded those negotiations, and as a result of that, we were gifted a dual name for the observatory, which is Inyari Mana Ilgari Bundra. So understand that can be a little bit of a mouthful. So just breaking it up phonetically there, you've got Inyari. Wadjuri like to roll their R's a bit, so it almost sounds like a bit of a D sound. So Inyari Mana Ilgari Bundra, so sharing sky and stars. So that name was gifted to us by a competition that was launched by the Wadjuri Yamaji Aboriginal Corporation, and the observatory name is both parts Wadjuri and English. Other than MWA, we also have located on the site, we have ASCAP, EDGES, as well as our hybrid power station and our central processing facility. We're also going to be hosting, as everyone's aware, of the SKA Low telescope, which has officially started construction late last year. A little bit of a brief history of where we were. So roughly 2009, the first allure was signed with the Wadjuri Yamaji with the establishment of the observatory, leading all the way up through to 2011, 2012, 2013, when the Murchison Wide Field Array was placed on site, and then moving forward to now where we're in the 2023, 2022 region, where we've got the establishment of the observatory across the whole station. And that's all I have to say, so I'll hand back to Mia, and I hope you all enjoy your afternoon.
Welcome everyone to our show today. This is my honor to introduce our team and our show to give you a basic background of what's going on for this show. First of all, please keep quiet. I do not mean keep yourself quiet, but keep your phone quiet. Okay? And secondly, we are astronomers from Shanghai Astronomical Observatory. Today we will give a show called the Chongzhen Calendar. It's basically a story about Minister Xu Guangqi. Xu Guangqi's memorial museum and his tomb was exactly located very near Shanghai Astronomical Observatory, and he died about 400 years ago. He was a pioneer to introduce Western science, especially Western astronomy, into China. So that's how the link from history about 400 years ago all the way to our observatory today. And so we are pleased to show you the show, telling a story about how international collaboration would introduce the huge change in China history. So, and we are the current team called Cosmic Dawn Nights, as you know. We're looking for era of realization and Cosmic Dawn. So please enjoy the show, and we will start.
奉天殿内，一众官员立于大殿两侧，崇祯坐于金台之上，锦衣卫宦官分列后侧。崇祯拿起钦天监之前报中的预测日食的奏折，脸上阴晴不定。
天文历法事关国运兴衰、民生大计，岂可掉以轻心？朕今天就让锦衣卫将你们拿下，看你们钦天监以后敢敷衍了事。
皇上，皇
上息怒啊！我大明所用之大统历，乃国初见证元符土地，实乃元太守郭守敬所作之授时历。260年来，历官按法推算，一毫未尝增损。大德3年6月，授时令推时而未时；大德6年6月，又时而失推。 守敬尚且如此，实在怪不得戈大人啊！皇上，历法大典成于以来，前所隆重，故500年不改之历法。臣曾在神宗万历38年，以西法预测过一次日食，结果与观测相符。臣恳请以 西法修订历法，
皇上万万不可，祖制不可轻改。大统历原用授时令授100年，虽偶有偏差，但修改完善之后未尝不可用，岂能直接使用洋人的办法？
李大人，你来说一说这西法跟大统历有何不同？
回皇上，臣曾从西洋传教士那里 获得过多本天文书籍，其上所载的天文术语，有许多是我们中国的往日先贤们没有提及到的。例如，西法将大地看作一个球，球上有经度、纬度，各地的交时时刻也不同，这与实际观测是相符的。
当今内忧外患，正需要一部好的历法来改变天下乱象。西法不妨于兼收，儒家无权而贪何吧？徐大人，就由你来监督编制新历法，成立一个例局，但同时需与钦天监和问文科的东局共同观测，比较哪版更为准确。周丰年，你就将功赎罪吧。
是，谢皇上。
臣并不负皇上的重托。
奏事毕。
例局内，官绅们正有条不紊地开展工作，有的在整理书籍，有的在计算天文数据，有的在研究天文器材。徐光启带着西洋传教士邓玉涵参观。
这些都是从科举中选拔出来精通历算的人才。此前朝廷严禁民间私习历法，此次改历不光希望能完成改历任务，还希望邓院士能够将先进的西方历法传授给历局学生们，为我大明培养一批懂得西方科学的人才。
大人您放心，定毫无保留。
你看看，我们的观测仪器如此老旧，测到的数据又怎么可能精准呢？
大人，这次我给您带来一个好东西，这是我在罗马的好友最新发明天文望远镜的引导工匠按图打造，以后我们观测数据的准确性大。
太好了，我这就让工匠按图打造。
这些都是天文数学等领域的最新书籍。有一个叫哥白尼的天文学家，他提出了日心说，不过目前我们使用更多的仍然是地图。
大家停一停手中的活，为大家说几句。这位是来自罗马林采学院的邓院士，他精通天文数理，非常博学，今后将与我们一起工作。我们要虚心向邓院士学习啊！此次改历古之未有，事关大明王朝的兴盛，大家一定要共同努力啊！
圣上有旨。
奉天承运，皇帝诏曰：金兵攻打北京城，徐光启速前往兵营练兵，打造兵器，击退清兵，钦此。
臣领旨。邓院士，我走之后，修历之事就拜托给你，千万不要落下修历进度。
大人您放心，我会竭尽全力。
冬天，历局一片萧条，不复刚成立之初的蓬勃向上的景象。邓玉涵半躺在榻上，指导官绅编制天文用表。先生，中国古代把天球定为365又1/4度，太阳每天移动1度，计算很不方便。照西法把天球定为360度，每度60分，每分60秒，计算起来方便多了。
我回来了，邓院士，你看看我带谁来了？
啊，大人，你怎么跟徐大人一起？
徐大人知道口是新闻的历史，
徐大人，这体是为命工匠打造设备。另外，邓院士，修理之事虽然重要，但是你的身体更为要紧啊！这就禀报皇上，让他派御医前来为你诊治。徐大人，我的身体我心里明白，原本就有救急，今日律法不是，天意公就好。亲儿阿大姆来了北京，由他接替我的工作，放心多了。不要说丧气话，等你的身体好转，我们还要一起完成修理任务呢。幸而大明快来人，快来人啊！
徐光启带着一举众人来到观象台。
皇上对此次交识测算颇为看重。日前，我一新天界、东局一同呈报了测算结果。此次测算观测能否相符，是日后能否推行新法的重要。万万要有忠心啊！
哟，徐大人，您召集我们一同观测，想必是对立局新法的测算结果很有信心吗？
魏大人，结果要测后才可能，但是相信我们的方法是更为科学。
一轮圆月挂在夜空中，众人等着月食出现。
徐大人，我记得你们呈报的是亥时3刻。
是的，魏大人。
现在几时了？
亥时4刻。
徐大人，不要轻易怀疑咱们老祖宗上千年的智慧。盲从西方，那欧罗巴人研究天文历法的时间长。我建议你好好学习一下中国的天文历法。
魏大人，就算这次预测有误，也不妨碍西法更为坚定的事实。无法测列秀五星经纬有赤道的，而西法有黄道的；无法做平面三角的，一定时差、视差、细差，总是平行，既能测圆，有勾与股交为实角，一语协调，西法立场。
说那么多，这测算结果不还是古法更准确？
虽然这次我们出现了失误，但是要及时改进。大家觉得这次出现的误差是什么原因造成的？
发言大人，这是旧版的中国呈现。
虽然这是一次失误，但是我们也要及时吸取教训。目前我们的新法还未有定法，皆是在西法基础上加减推算。日后我们 还需多加验证改进才行。
是。时间来到1633年8月，观象台上，立局官绅正在调整日食观测仪器，而东局和青天舰也在做着准备。他们使用水盆映射法观测。
许大人，听说您身体欠安，何必亲自前来？到时候观测结果不理想，更加劳神伤身啊！
魏大人，立局这2年潜心研究，我们私下里也做了实验。这次我对西法有信心。
那咱且看看吧。
初窥深圳1刻内25分11秒西北。时胜深圳2刻内61分34秒西北。复原酉时1刻内39分23秒西北。
对的，其实这次测算结果，是因为我们结合了西法的先进之处，将其放进了所以测算结果才。
也就是说，你们用的大统计模型。
是。其实东西两法有许多相似之处。东法言万物，西说岁轮，西说恒星东行，其实在原理上只是西法在一些计算方法上。
这是我魏某人派的。
我们之间并无成败之处，我们都是追求真理，只要有用，东西又有何分别？
奏效。
如今新法兼收并蓄，业已完备，已经可以呈报给皇上，这是大家共同努力的结果。我们也算是给大明的百姓做了些有意义之事。
Dynasty ended in 1640. Johann Schönbell, this guy, the chief astrologer of the Imperial Observatory during the Qing Dynasty. The total calendar was updated into the Shixian calendar, which actually is become the lunar calendar. Thanks. performance was given in Chinese, and some part was given in Asian Chinese. So that's why we prepared the voucher for you to understand. The key point in the idea was that no matter it's Chinese style or Western style, the truth is what we are looking for.
Well done, everyone. Come back. Well, on behalf of everyone, I want to say thank you very much. I was following along with the brochure. I think it's an amazing story. As I was watching and observing, I thought Madame Ye would be very proud. Madame Ye is a very highly respected Chinese astronomer. He was one of the people going back many, many years, decades, brought together Chinese and Western astronomers to work together and develop science together. Every time we have a conference with our Chinese colleagues, Madame Ye demands that everybody stand up and sing a song. So Phil and myself and others many times over have sung Waltzing Matilda or some other iconic Australian song. I just thought the performance reflected a lot of what Madame Ye has achieved over the years. I think it's a beautiful story. Thank you very, very much. We have a small gift for you in return, which is one of the paintings of the emu in the sky, done by one of the Yamaji art artists, one of our great friends, Margaret Whitehurst. So this is actually quite a famous painting, and again brings together Indigenous views of the sky and Indigenous Western views. So be very pleased to give you this, and hopefully it can hang somewhere at Shanghai Astronomical Observatory. So, very much.
In southern hemisphere, we can see this. In the northern hemisphere, we cannot. So that's really remarks the collaboration is really important. I think in the show, because here are some items you can see on table. Actually, this also the gifts you can take that. But to take the gifts, you need to answer some questions. The one who get the question right first, you will get it. Okay? So the first question is, which one is Xu Guangqi? Please look around and see which one is Xu Guangqi. Can you identify? Point out. That one. You're right. So you will have this. And next question. When is the Chongzhen calendar finished? Yes, you're right. Great. And the next question, who is the Chongzhen emperor? Okay, yes, you're right. It's an easy question. And finally, the final question might be a bit hard, a little hard. Okay, so who finally finished the calendar and updated it, finally becomes the lunar calendar we use today in China? Which one? Okay, then who is Adam? Which one is Adam? Yes, you're right. Great. So this is for you. I did it. Okay, so I guess that's really the end of the show. Thanks for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I guess we are moving now into the afternoon session. So it's my pleasure to welcome Bob Goeke up to the stage. This is the same Bob that I described on Tuesday as the wandering guru that kept us all phase calibrated during the construction and commissioning of 128T. So we'll say no more and hand over to you, Bob.
Do we have? Ooh. Yeah, thank you. You don't actually all have to sit in the dark. You know. When Stephen suggested that I talk about building the MWA, I looked in my notes, and the thing I found is that my memory of exactly what we did in those days was quite inaccurate. I remembered the good place. This is like raising children. It's much like you remember the good things and your memory has magically erased some of the bad things. In this particular case, I was also reminded of the parable of the 6 blind men and the elephant, old Indian parable, where each of the blind men feels a part of the elephant, learns something about it, comes away convinced that he understands. But in fact, none of the 6 do. And I feel that way, that I'm one of the many people who contributed to building the MWA. And I have my own memories and recollections and vision of it. But I'm sure if you asked another 5 people, you would get different stories. And so this is just my version of history, if you will. And it also, if you were there, it will make you realize that your version of history, probably of other events, is also probably limited by your viewpoint. For history, in my going back, and people started working on MWA kinds of concepts of radio astronomy a long way. Back in 2004, an international group of Australians, US, Indian organizations got together, decided that they would merge their resources and talents and put together a program to build MWA. And in 2006, according to my notes, in September of 2006, it really got started. I mean, money started, serious amounts of money started to flow. So that's 2006. In 2000, and the other thing I should mention is the 2006 proposal was for 500 T. I can't imagine a group of scientists and engineers choosing 500. It is not a round number in my mathematics at all. Okay, but it says there right in the document, 500 T. I don't know what they were thinking. In 2009, in sort of the third quarter of 2009, summer of 2009, the board brought in Wayne Arcus to manage the program. And I came, like within a month of Wayne. And the idea was that between 2006, 2009, we're making progress. Well, progress was being made. I wasn't there. Progress was being made, but it was only getting to 32T before it was quite clear that money was going to run out. And what was called for at this point was a proposal to the funding sources that we had to finish the job. Okay. And Wayne was brought on to make it a real large science program, fully documented, schedules, spreadsheets, the whole works. I was brought in to organize the engineering as befits a large international program. Okay, documentation, tracking of problems, things like that. Of course, it didn't happen right away that we got our act together, but we started working on that. And that went on for about a year. And we made a lot of progress. And I believe it was the fall of 2010, a year later, I remember being in a big meeting with NSF in the United States, where we were feeling them out, saying, well, we sort of got a number, I don't want to tell you, but how much would you believe, we could ask for, and, before you started laughing, right? And there were some numbers bandied about. And in typical fashion, and I will get to it later, the number that we had, on the hidden piece of paper was larger than they thought was credible from their budget point of view. But they said, yeah, you put in a proposal for this many tens of millions and, we'll seriously consider it. Well, after they started seriously considering it, and there was a period of time here where the Australians and certainly the United States had their own funding cash flow problems. And it also takes an organization in the United States, NSF or NASA, that I spend most of my time with, a fair amount of time before they actually come to a conclusion and send it to you. Beginning of 2011, you start to get the feeling that, yeah, this may not be a successful proposal. And we're sort of we're into the, I don't know, X12, X13 field campaigns to try to get 32T put together. But in February of 2011, actually at that point, I believe Wayne was just about going out the door. He had gotten another job. It was quite clear that we were having not good vibes for getting funding for doing the whole 512. And we started asking AAL well, if NASA doesn't come through, will you stay with us and send money? And essentially the answer we got, although it's never formally, was, we got your back, mates. Okay, so we'll keep going. And then knowing that, and it was in May of 2011 that NASA finally said, thanks, but no thanks. We have other issues, other projects to work on. But by this time, we had spent 18 months, I had spent 18 months, I'll go to the personal now, getting to know the team, getting to know the engineering. I'm not an RF engineer. I've done all my engineering in mostly X-ray astronomy, although some human flight experiments. But getting to know the people, getting to know the facilities. And with the benefit of those 18 months and the fact that Tom Buhler came on board to help manage a reduced effort. And we also had some help from Ron Remillard at MIT covering some of the management. Well, when NSF actually pulled out, Ron lost his funding. We started to pull together what would be necessary to do a 128T. And it was a moderately frenetic 5 or 6 months. So by the summer of 2011, we had a plan. And the plan involved, all the infrastructure work that needed to be done. We had a good idea as to what it was going to take to build the antennas. We certainly had the antennas, beamformers, receivers, correlators. Everything was ready, but it wasn't quite ready. You'd have something that was in the lab and it would work, mostly. And especially in M&C, measurement and control, there was an effort being done both at University of Washington, UW for the people in the United States, and Ed Morgan at MIT, and others. But they, of course, couldn't do their work if the hardware, wasn't fairly stable. You can't write the programs for monitor and control if no one's quite finished building the thing you're trying to monitor. The correlator was another problem, and I stayed fairly well away from it. I wasn't expert in the correlator. It wasn't until that summer that we translated from the hardware fixed FPGA correlator approach to the hybrid model. And that was a good thing. About that time, I had looked at the correlator and I couldn't quite understand what we were trying to do, in the sense that it looked like there was too many things you were asking these FPGAs and this whole system to do. And I finally stumbled across a memo, not a paper, nothing, just sort of a memo that said, oh yeah, this correlator that we've got will, be a good proof of concept, and we can probably get it to work for 32T. But of course, we're going to have to completely redesign it and use new technology to be able to migrate up at that point to 512. And I thought, okay, I didn't think this would work, and this memo predicted years before this wouldn't work. Fortunately, at that time, New Zealand joined the consortium, and they brought with them an offer from IBM New Zealand, as I recall. Who knew that IBM had anything other than a sales room there? And they volunteered to send us, as I remember, 24 boxes with computers, GPUs, and we moved off in that direction, which I think everybody in the field is now doing, using GPUs and backends. we gave a proposal for the 128T to AAL in the summer, I think it was August of 2011. And to their credit, they didn't just sit around and think about it. So in September, they said, okay, sounds like a good thing. But of course, you realize that we have our funding constraints too. And this money sort of, in some bureaucratic sense, will run out in 2012. So it would be good if you got this thing working and, you know, ready to go, start commissioning. We had to define what, you know, this meant, but by the end of 2012, and I look at Tom Buhler, you know, and we've all got our specialties, and I'm saying, that's 15 months from now, okay? We've got 32T on the ground. We're running the X16 campaign. We're finally getting, there were weather problems. That's why it wasn't run earlier. And now you want us to, you know, take this apart and build 128 in 15 months. Well, the good news is we've been working on laying things out and seeing what needed to be done. And from my point of view, the fortunate thing was that I'd been now working with the team long enough that I could trust them to build hardware, and they could trust me to sort of lead them in the proper path so that we'd all get there. But it was certainly a sporting event. There were little things that you know, you don't run into in other places. For instance, Adam Beardsley and his colleagues at University of Washington had laid out, for instance, a pseudo-random positioning of tiles. Has to be pseudo-random, because if you throw just random in, you get some funny artifacts. Any random pattern actually has funny artifacts. And so you want sort of pseudo-random to smooth out UV planes and things. He's got this. And then we find out one day, by the way, MRO needs a runway. A runway, okay, in case something goes wrong or you want to deliver ASCAP parts or something, I don't know. Certainly in the outback, you want a runway, so if there's medical emergencies and things like that. That's fine, except that they wanted to put it, and they did put it, between ASCAP and the NWA plots of ground. And we had one or two of our tiles, you know, on paper, was supposed to be right there where they were putting the runway across. Had to move that. Operating in the Murchison or any of the places back there, you've got certain heritage sites that you have to avoid. The heritage sites are really kept quite secret, so tourists don't stumble into them and take artifacts away and things like that. You can understand this, but all of Australia has not been surveyed, okay? In fact, bloody little of it has been surveyed for artifacts. And so we did a heritage survey, fed that back, moved some tiles around so we weren't putting tiles on heritage. Other strange things happen. I mean, CSIRO was paying for the fiber optic link from Bellardi all the way to Perth. It's good. That summer, they got it up to about 1 gigabit a second. A few months later, okay, they get it up to almost 10 gigabits a second. And I think it was about a month after they got good connection, finally, all the way to Geraldton at least. About a month after that, it goes dead, because somewhere between Murchison and Geraldton, some contractor had been digging for gold or water or whatever, and was operating his backhoe and took out the fibers. Things happen, okay? But the next 15 months, you know, can be summarized mostly as controlled chaos. It really was. We started digging trenches in, let's see, February of 2012. Supposed to be a 2-month job. We even went over the ground with ground penetrating radar to make sure there weren't any, you know, places where we were going to try to dig trenches to a meter and there was only 2 centimeters of topsoil, you know. So we'd done that. But in spite of that, all kinds of things are going off. In spite of that, the two months of trenching that was provided, that we had planned on, turned out to be 4 months. Tom's a good man when it comes to getting a program. He didn't even use up quite all of his contingency when the thing went from 2 months to 4 months. And shows you how good he was at putting in. There was a time when we were at AAL and initially talking to them about what we were going to do for the money they were sending us. And they said, well, gee, you've got an awful lot of reserve here. And Tom says, we're going to need it. There's always the unknowns and the unknown unknowns. Okay. Things like digging trenches and taking twice as long and having the machine break down in the middle of the Murchison and having to send for spare parts. Really helped. And then there was 2 or 3 months at the end when we plopped the receivers down. Well, I should say that, you know, I guess I was after the trenches got dug. In May, we staked out where the tiles were going to be. In June, we laid down the ground screens. In July, we had a whole bunch of students putting down, you know, 2,000 dipoles and cabling them up, getting the beamformers. And then we started putting all the cabling from the beamformers to the receivers. And Tina Salas still talks about the time when she and I and Tom Buhler and a couple of volunteers spent a week out there pulling cables across the sand and the clay in between the bushes. We laid down about 12 kilometers of LMR 400 cable, just pulling them across the ground. It was wonderful. It was a fun time. It really was. Gets you out of the office. And so by the beginning of December of 2012, we were able to, you know, with a straight face, you know, say to the world, we had put 128T together and it was functional. And we had tested it in parts. We still had the commissioning to do and turning it into a science instrument. And that's true for any science instrument that you get it sort of put together. But now it's time to start calibrating, getting the bugs out, things like that. We could have done better. We didn't have very good configuration management. We didn't have good central documentation, didn't have issue tracking. Simulators were a problem because we could barely had time to build the flight, see my heritage. Barely had time to get the instrument boxes done in the time that we had. We certainly didn't have time to build spare parts so that we could give like the M&C people their own little test jig and things like that. So that was a problem. I think at some level it's unavoidable because we were, you know, going hell-bent for election. And certainly it's always a challenge with these international programs, or for any program that's dependent upon a variety of organizations, each one of which has really its own funding schedule, its own internal priorities. I mean, you're not the only program in town for any of the participating organizations. And other people have problems as well as you, and there has to be decisions made. To be an effective project engineer, I think I was effective. We got it built. I traveled a lot. People have said this. I found heuristically that if I didn't visit every group at least every 6 weeks, 6 weeks I determined was about the limit. If you didn't see people every 6 weeks, they would drift off. Not that they would physically drift off. They'd start working on problems which weren't really what you wanted them to work on. I mean, the job of the PE in this case was sort of herding cats, okay? You had to keep everybody sort of moving in the same direction. But to do that, because it's somewhat of a random process of all these people working on their individual boxes at different speeds and trying to get things done. You sort of need to herd the cats in a consistent direction. And I just found that you had to do that. And the fact that, I mean, my big choice was, am I going to go around the world clockwise? Or am I going to go around counterclockwise? Okay. I had a desk. I had 4 different desks. I had one at Haystack, one in Cambridge, one at Curtin, one at RRI. Okay. Just went from desk to desk to desk. It was very good. Each team, the PI, the project engineer, to be effective, the teams have to feel that the project engineer, the project management represents them to the other people. You have to really believe that. You have to shield them from outside problems, interference, things that would just simply distract them. You have to show empathy because they have to really believe in you. Because if the people don't believe in the leadership, okay, it gets sloppy, it gets slower, doesn't work. And you have to accept failure. I mean, you know, sometimes you wind up and people say, hey, it don't work. At which point, the real project engineer earns his money because he had to figure out some other way of getting there. There is an issue, I will say, for a large science facility like this, which I think we did very well. And that is that initially you make a proposal and you know what science you want to do, and then you figure out what instrument do I need? What facility do I need to do this project? Okay. So it's science, facility, implementation. Finally, you get through negotiating and you have money, and they send you some money. It's never as much as you wanted. The schedule's never what you want. Some of the people you were depending on have left and gone to other jobs or other projects, okay? At this point, you ought to stop and reconsider and look at it as you need to build the best damn instrument you can with the resources you have. And you may think this is a bit of a distinction without a difference because you're still trying to do the same science. But in your day-to-day decisions, you really need to flip it around. And I think we did that very well because we came out to the end and it was on time and on budget. But it was only because we knew where the limitations were. We knew what the boundary conditions were. And we didn't say, gee, I've got to have this kind of response out of the receiver to do this science. No. The answer was, we need this kind of receiver. We have to have it delivered on these days, and it's got to, cost this much, okay? And it's got to be a reliable. I mean, Kat yesterday said the problem here is you need a facility that is reliable, that you understand at the best you can, okay? So you have to flip this around. You want the best instrument you can build within the boundary conditions. And that's why, you know, ultimately, originally, they got Tom Buller and myself to sort of take that approach, we're not scientists, take that approach to building the instrument. And that's all I have. Questions?
Well, thank you so much, Bob, and we appreciate all your things. As somebody who's been involved in I've been involved in a couple of projects, but you've been involved in many more, and there's always some level of chaos.
There always is, yes.
Were there what was your impression on both the magnitude of the chaos in the MWA build? Forget the funding, but once it got going that way, and or were there flavors of the chaos which were quite distinct compared to NASA programs or other things that you've been involved with?
This program, from all the things that I've worked on, was far more chaotic simply because we had so many different organizations to work with. On most of my jobs at NASA, we spend tens of millions of dollars organizing ourselves, doing the systems engineering, making sure we understand interfaces, spending 6 months finding the optimum subcontractor to do a piece. In this case, I don't think it was the distance particularly. Okay, the fact that I had to travel was not a problem or really a big problem. It was that where we started in the summer of 12, in the summer, none of the boxes were working at that point. And so everybody was running. And that, I think, was the big difference from all the other programs I've worked on. I don't know how much more I can say about that, Miguel. Other questions?
More questions?
Thank you. So looking back now, and with all the online meeting facilities that we have, would you have been able to herd the cats just as efficiently with online meetings, or do you think you'd still have to travel just as much in order to get things done?
Two things, not a chance. And in fact, it was tried. The money that was spent to get up to 32T, there was a lot of inefficiency in terms of different people working on different problems and not proceeding along the path, okay? And it's because if you call somebody up or in a meeting and you say, how's it going? Oh, it's great. I got one or two little problems, but it's fine. If you go and visit them, you sit down in their office and have a cup of coffee, or maybe even go to lunch, okay? After about half an hour, they start telling you about some of the problems they had, some of the real problems they've got. That's one issue of information flowing outward, okay? The other thing that I think is equally necessary is that they have to, speaking for me as a project engineer, each individual group has to recognize me as not only a real person with real problems of my own and, you know, foibles and things like that, incompetences, okay? But they have to believe in me and trust me that I will represent them to the other people whom they do not see very often, and that I can tell them something about the other people and their problems, and their real problems that they didn't tell you on the conference call, okay? And I don't see how you can develop that personal empathy, you know, using Zoom, okay? Zoom's great. Well, we had TeamSpeak. TeamSpeak worked just fine for negotiating well-defined problems. TeamSpeak or remote meetings works. But for getting, you know, the other big problem here is that if you want to stay on budget and on schedule, you have to be able to identify problems before they rise to the surface of being a problem. And you don't see that deeply into what people are doing unless you go and visit. And it can feel like just a total waste of time that you helicopter in, you spend 2 days, and you helicopter out. And yet, you learn a lot. Okay? And from a management point of view, that's what it took on this job. There's no way we could have put this whole thing together in 15 months if I hadn't established rapport with the different groups. I understood what their concerns were, okay? And that they trusted me because, you know, when push comes to shove, you got to make decisions, okay? And on a program like this, which is moving along, you got to make a decision fairly rapidly. You can't call a meeting. I mean, aside from the fact that some things just don't work as a democracy. And one of my personal failings is that I tend to get somewhat autocratic when it comes to making design decisions and things. Everybody can have their opinion. But after I've heard everybody's opinion, I simply make a decision and we move on. Okay. There are some people for whom that doesn't work. And on my other jobs, I invite them to work on a different job. That's actually turned out fairly well.
Okay, I'm sure we've got a million more questions, but we've run out of time. So please join me in thanking Bob again. Bob is hanging around, of course, so please feel free to buttonhole him at tea or lunch or whatever. Okay, so we will move on, and I'll invite Murray Hadley to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar elders, past, present, and emerging on the land in which we stand today in this meeting. Also, very importantly, to acknowledge the same acknowledgements to the Wadjuri Yamaji people on whose land that project sits. To share who we are, Goeke Australia was founded in 2000 by myself and is an electrical contractor based in Geraldton in the Midwest of Western Australia. To put that into some sort of a context, we're 3.5 hours drive away from the Bellardi site, Bellardi station. There's another thank you I'd like to make, and that's to Curtin, and in particular to Tom and Stephen, who got us on this project, I suppose is the right way to put it, and have supported us all the way through, and their site teams as well, my site teams, their site teams. I think the relationship has just been exceptional. I just can't speak highly enough of that. Really, the collaboration between our organisations at all levels has created a relationship that's been based on trust and respect, and that's something special, particularly in our industry, construction industry. So I'm going to take you back a little bit and show you something that's not actually MWA, but I'll put some context around this shortly. So when Goeke first started looking at what this project looked like and what it meant and who was involved, this is kind of the org chart we came up with. And to be quite honest, it was just scary. We looked at it and thought, what is this job? What is this project? What are we dealing with here, you know? So, and it really looked like any other construction, because we're constructors, right? So it looked like any other construction or even operations project that I'd ever seen in my life. There were so many moving parts. That's pretty old. It's probably not relevant to MWA, but it gives you an idea where we sat as a newbie on the block, looking at what this project was going to be like for us. Okay. As we got to engage and understand the project, and met some more people, it became clear to us that the prime stakeholders were scientists. Now, Goeke's been a constructor for quite a while, since 2000. That's when I started the business. And we've worked with miners, engineers, architects, you know, Western Power, water corporations, government agencies. We've never worked with scientists. So the science project language and the acronyms that we got, that we understood from all these scientists, was sometimes challenging, trying to understand what it all meant. But to me, in the end, the anchor that pulled us all together was a common purpose. You know, essentially, we all had a desire to succeed and putting our minds to any challenge that came our way. So our construction IP, over 15 years, as it turns out, met science desire quite well. Okay. As we started to get in, actually, I think the first job we did on site, and I'm sure Tom's going to remind me, I'm sure we connected some generators or dragged some cables around of some description. But the first time was in where we came across really the project requirements, and in particular RFI screening, and you know, and just this term radio silent come up, and we just thought, well, what the hell does that mean? So we had to go off pretty quickly and try and teach ourselves what radio silent meant, what RFI protection or screening meant, what was all this thing about, you know? And I remember the first, I'm sure it was with Tom, that we said, okay, we're going to put these air conditioners in, and we need radio silence on these things. So then we started looking at it, what that actually meant. Now that sketch on your left, I wouldn't suggest we'd need to go into a technical manual or an RFQ for a quote or any of those sorts of things, but that's kind of where we started. And I recognise that handwriting, and that guy still works for me. Okay. So I haven't shown him this because I only found this just a day or so ago. I'm going to ring up Andrew later on and say, hey, do you remember doing this? And then what we ended up with, I think it's actually a map of how to do some penetrations in a wall and how it's going to work and all those sorts of things. But in the end, you know, the whole radio silence, and this is what I mean about terminology, the whole radio silence, RFI protection thing, all sounded very complicated and very sciencey. But in the end, the solution was pretty simple. You know, effectively, it was a Faraday cage around the air conditioning units, and the problem was solved. You know, it's quite incredible. Challenges. Don't you just love that blue sky and that red dirt? It's just beautiful. So our first significant infrastructure project, the MWA, our first significant infrastructure project at the MWA was around 2012, and that was with Tom again. And this site has the most adverse terrain I believe I've ever come across in my 40 years of my career, without a doubt. It's a hard place to work. It's a hard place to live. And whilst Bellardi Station is a perfect place for a radio astronomy project, it's a terrible place to try and build anything. Probably as bad as any site I think we've ever worked on. Would like to make a comment though on the site, in the facilities on the site. It's probably one of the few sites I've sent men, and we've been sending them there for 15 years. We've never had a complaint about the camp. So obviously someone got that really right. And congratulations to your team for doing that. So Bob, I think that is the machine that broke down. From what I remember. Yeah. As I said, extremely adverse conditions. And excavation was a real challenge. And I think one of my guys at one stage was talking about explosives and things. I think we managed to avoid that, which was a good thing. Though with all construction projects, time and budget are of priority, as always. The key to our success on this project, I believe, was open and honest conversation around time and budget with our client. And it was always a two-way street. That methodology of approaching the project was there from day one, from the time we bid, the time we achieve practical completion. That close collaboration has been the basis of GECO and Curtin partnership moving forward, delivering numerous projects, too many to count. In fact, I looked at the project folder the other day and it was kind of a bit ridiculous that we've achieved in the last 15 years. I do recall, and someone just reminded me before we came in, that some of this conversation around this particular project was exactly that, was around risk. And it was held over a cup of coffee in Fremantle. And it was just like, what are the risks? And we're open and honest about it. And that's worked for everyone, I think. Okay. Kind of reluctant to put that photo up to start with, the one on the left-hand side, because my HSE manager would probably kill me. But, you know, working out there has just been all about having a can-do attitude, you know. And it's all about people. If you've got people that can actually do it, they can work with other people and get stuff done, you can do anything. You can find some innovation. Most of the time it's nice to do it safely because everyone gets home okay. That's probably not going to pass muster on another project, but we got away with it there. So you guys obviously know what that is. Trying to remember the year now, it's not coming to me rapidly. 15, 16, I think, Curtin commissioned GECO to create a deployment study for the LFAA. And aside from our experience with the MWA, what did GECO really know about a large-scale deployment of a radio telescope? And the answer was probably nothing to start with, as it's never been done before. But as it turns out, we probably knew as much, if not more, than anyone else on the planet, you know, because no one's done it, right? So GECO brought two significant pieces of IP to the table for that study. One was the fact that we'd been on site, we knew conditions, we knew the people, we knew what we were up against, you know, we just got that site experience. The second one was we'd delivered a lot of electrical infrastructure around utility scale solar farms. And that's relevant because, you know, at the end of the day, the principles are the same. LFAA, solar farm, not very many elements to the actual construction. There's just truckloads of them, just lots and lots of them. So the study included logistics, materials control, procurement, site facilities, labour force, full estimate costing. That study has had several updates as scope and costing shifted over the years and now sits with the SKO. The good bit about that for my company is that IP has been retained by us from the activity of actually doing it. It's invaluable to GECO as a local contractor, particularly in the Midwest. We're someone now based there that's had that piece of experience. It's brilliant, and it should be as equally as important to the SKA project moving forward. Pretty sure that's a Photoshop photo. Doesn't quite look real. Anyway, it's a nice photo, it looks good. You probably recognise that as, well, you can interpret it as being the ASCAP, I guess, out of Bellardi. Working out there with Curtin has given us some really unique opportunities, you know, that we would never have had being a regional contractor. At the point we got involved in this, the ASCAP constructor had actually completed their works, and it was with CSIRO to get it to 100%, and they were having some problems. We didn't really understand the problems. I'll be quite honest about that. You know, there were some issues that needed to be finalised, and I don't even know how I managed to find out about that, but I think someone's mentioned it to me that, you know, they think they need a hand. So doing what I do, I jumped on a plane, went to Sydney, went to the CSIRO facility in Sydney, which is quite an experience just in itself. Drive through the front gate and there's a missile there and a radome there. And so I sat down with someone there and just said, listen, I don't understand what the science is that you're missing here, this, or why it's not operational, but how can we help you out? We're here to help you. So from there, with our workshops, our warehouse facility in Geraldton, our knowledge of the site, and working really closely with Brett and his team, which was really very rewarding for all my team, you know, It was a fantastic experience. And again, it's an experience that's been retained by a Midwest-based business that's really close to this project. I'm really hoping we stay close to it. That's got nothing to do with the MWA. All right, just a photo. It just shows how we work with our clients, I guess, is what I was trying to portray there. There has to be a lot of trust and respect. The saying goes that there are only two certainties of life, and those are death and taxes. But I do know for certain that whatever Curtin do moving forward, whether it's on this side, another side, or anywhere, that GECO can be relied upon as a trusted, reliable, project-enabled partner. We look forward to what we can do in the future with Curtin. In regard to the SKA project, we've forged some really close ties with the SKA team that's been assembled in Geraldton. And we've been performing some initial site works to date and hope to be of assistance with them with the deployment of the LFAA. Whilst there is significant infrastructure works about to commence out there, we're not sure we're going to be involved, but there'll be a future for us there. Our long-term game, really, to be honest, is to be involved with the project once it's built. You know, that's what we see as a huge benefit to the Midwest and to our organisations. Delivering and sustaining sustaining capital works that'll no doubt need to be deployed during the course of its life, 20, 25 years, whatever it happens to be. And that fits really nice with a part of our long-term aspirations as well, and social licence to operate. We're establishing a JV with the Wadgery at this moment in time. It's not inked yet, but we're working really hard on that right at the present time. And as you know, they're the ROs on that land, TOs, sorry, the traditional owners. So, you know, between science, traditional owners, and traditional owner enablement, really, is what I should say, and our construction experience, we stand to make a substantive difference to our local community. And that's really important, I think. GECO team and I really look forward to this next chapter. Righto. Well, you know what that is in the background. In the foreground is an old observatory, I think it's called. It's called the Griffith Observatory. It's the Griffith Observatory, and it's in LA. How different a site could you get? I mean, how are we going to get radio silence and no light interference on that site? It's not going to happen. Anyway, there's a story here, and it's a real personal connection for me. I was in LA in 2019 having a holiday, and we'd done all the usual sort of, you know, touristy things around LA, you know, seeing this and seeing that. And I was looking for something else to fill in the half day. And I just started searching around on the tourist sites and all this stuff and found this place. I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. I'm not going to look at that. And I'm a bit of a frustrated architect, I think is what I might be. And I like Art Deco stuff. And this is built in the Art Deco style. So you go up the top of the hill and look at it, and you wander around and have a look at everything that's going on there. And I was looking at a particular display, and there was a young lady there that I think it was like a holiday job or something, and we struck up a conversation. Turns out she was an astronomy student. And I said, wow, okay. I said, do you know anything about the SKA and the MWA and this? And started to tell her a few of the things about what I've been doing with that for the last 10 years. And she was just like almost beside herself, you know, and really gushed. Thank you so much for the data. I got nothing to do with the data, I was digging holes, but you know, I took it anyway. It was great, you know. So to me, that was a real catalyst of understanding that we really were on an international project. You know, it really brought it home. So I'm pretty much ready to close now. I guess I've pretty much said what I need to say, but I believe in creating this presentation. It really has brought it home to me how much we've learned and done and achieved on that site with a great bunch of people. And we look forward to more of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the key takeaway from that one for me is that the scientists are the best people you've ever worked with.
They are.
It's good to hear. So questions?
You take that one.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's quite interesting to see that perspective. I'm wondering if you've got any of the experience from building on these kinds of remote sites, and have you been able to transfer that to other projects, or do you see that as a
Probably not direct findings and learnings, but I think I read another presentation I did not long ago, actually it was a few years ago, where one of the outcomes from this for us and for my entire business, I think, and we've still got people there that have, have experienced all this. One of the guys standing in that photo when I talked about the LFAA study was the deployment study he's coming up to 20 years this year. So for him, Bilardi is just like, oh yeah, we're going home again, But I guess my point there is that by retaining all that IP and having all those people there and working with such a different project, it's given a lot of my people a different way of looking at problems. Problem solving in the science world is very different to our world, right? Okay, and we've sort of taken that on board, if you like, and I keep reminding our team of that. Only just this morning we were talking about something with a problem with a particular renewable resource, that we're trying to understand how we could deliver on it. And I said, just think outside the box, guys. Just have to get some another way around, and we found it. But yeah, cool. That's probably our main takeaway from working there. Other than scientists, the best people to work for.
More questions? Well, just in terms of the, you're telling the story about how, you were looking towards to SKA and LFAA and thinking, oh, we don't know anything about this. And I was thinking, while you're saying this, but hang on a minute, you're the only ones who've sort of been there. So is that sort of an advantage going forward? This is part of your offering, your wealth of experience on the site?
Yeah, definitely. We've certainly made ourselves known. I guess the scale of the SKA has to be recognised as well, I mean, it's a much bigger scale project, and it's beyond really, we talk about budget and timing and all those things. For a company of our size, for us to deliver that is actually beyond our capability. So it's understandable that we're not there on the front porch, as it were, but it's not going to stop us getting there.
More questions? We have more times, so any more questions? Oh, good. No one's going to complain about leaving early. So did you have a question? No. Okay. Thanks. Let's thank Murray again. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty, we'll get started. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. We'll start the last session of the afternoon. This is a very important session. We have speaking in this session the important people that help us actually use the MWA telescope. So we have a triplet of talks coming up, and I'm going to call them How to Ask for Data, How to Keep Data, How to Get Good Data. Those are the three talks coming up. And to kick us off, we have Andrew Williams. Take it away, Andrew.
Hello all. I've been working on MWA software since about 2007 or so, the monitor and control software, starting out with Miguel and Ed Morgan and Chris Williams and all of the old faces. But nowadays, I'm the guy that takes your observing proposal and actually schedules the observations in the database for the telescope. So this talk is extremely self-serving. It's mostly designed to make my job easier, and hopefully making my job easier will mean you get better data. So the first thing is, I'm not the TAC. You don't need to convince me how wonderful your proposal is. In the observing instructions, I just want to see what data you want, not why you want it. So I take what you put into proposal and actually turn it into observations in the telescope. And my job is easier if I can understand your proposal. So don't write it like a scientific paper. Write it like observing instructions for an optical astronomer that isn't part of your research area, doesn't know what all of the funky acronyms mean, doesn't know all of the catalogs that you might be using that I don't. First step, make sure it's clear what you want to observe. So unless you've got lots of sources, put them in the proposal form. There's a new JOT form set up where you can actually enter RA, DEC, comment, and name. So put them in that form. Use your common sense. If you're interested in a drift scan of an alt-azimuth, don't try and put it in there. Just put that in the instructions. If you have lots of sources, don't try and enter them one by one in the form. Put them in a table in the attached document. If you have a source name, then I'll probably use that to actually schedule the telescope. So the code will try and look it up from Vizier. If your source name doesn't resolve in Vizier, then it won't work. So if you do use a source name, try and use and don't strip off all of the prefixes that are necessary for it to resolve. And please put the RA in hours, not in degrees. I started out in optical astronomy. Everybody uses hours in optical astronomy. If somebody says that something's 18 hours, I know where it is. If you give me a galactic latitude and longitude, I have no idea what time of year that's visible, how long I need to leave between the next object for it to leave a gap, things like that. And if you want to observe in between two sources, if you've got a couple of sources and you can fit them in the same observation, let me know which pointing you want to use. Calibration, we take calibrators every morning and evening on a standard set of frequencies. The gleam bands, dual bands, so two 15 megahertz bands, a set of 12 2.56 megahertz wide bands and a sort of picket fence arrangement, and another one called picket, which is 24 individual channels covering a wide chunk of frequency. And these have been picked to avoid interference, things like the MilSats and Orbcom satellites and stuff like that. If you pick your own frequencies and you pick some that are right over 137 megahertz or the 220 megahertz MilSat band or something, I'll probably come back and say, do you really want to observe at that frequency? Because it'll be pretty terrible. And if you use one of these channel sets, then you'll have the nightly calibration sets to use as well as the ones that are scheduled with your observations. You'll have a bit more redundancy if something doesn't work. The proposal form now allows you to enter the channel sets you want either as a name, one of those strings, or you can define a custom channel set. You can list off your own individual 24 frequency channels or whatever ranges or channel sets you want and put them as channels, not in megahertz, please. And remember that the center frequency of any coarse channel is equal to that coarse channel number times 1.28 megahertz. And also, when would you like your observations? You might have to have commensal observations with Parkes or GMRT or something like that. So let me know. And if not, let me know what time of year you want your observation to be scheduled. You know, we'd like to observe them early in the night. We'd like to observe them when they transit, when they're near the zenith, that kind of thing. So try and think about when you'd like them, particularly for large time requests. You know, we may well get 200 nights worth of time that everybody wants in August or something like that. So it's good for planning. And of course, if you can't observe during the nighttime, I might be forced to schedule during the daytime. So that's another option. Think about the order you want. If you want a bunch of time on a telescope and I can't fit all of that time into one night, how do you want your observations ordered? For example, do you want to loop over all 5 sources and for each source loop over all frequencies and for each frequency take one observation? So you're scattering a lot of different sources and frequencies evenly over your entire 60 hours? Or do you want to observe a whole lot on one source and then a whole lot on another source and so on? So in that, you want to think about what sort of redundancy you're interested in. How much of your science you'd lose if a night got taken out because the telescope was out of action. If a night got taken out because it was a particularly bad ionosphere. If you do have data that's unusable, I'll try and reschedule it, particularly if it was from telescope downtime, but sometimes that's not possible. Towards the end of a semester, it might not be possible to retake the data, particularly if you've waited until the end of the semester to look at it, and by then it's not visible anymore. And also whether you expect time variability in your source and how would you like to sample that time variability. So day and night observations, if it's not available at night, we can do it in the daytime. Or if there aren't enough nighttime hours, roll the proposals. So we can also optimize the signal to noise by choosing a pointing that puts the sun in a beam null without taking the source too far out of the beam center. But that only really works when both the source and the sun are fairly high up in the sky, where the side lobes are well characterized. So we can do daytime observing, but observing just after sunrise or just before sunset kind of sucks. And I don't know how I did that either. Commensal observing, if you're scheduling around something like GMRTR parks, obviously you don't know when you submit the MWA proposal when you're going to get the parks time, but let me know when you expect to know. So how long do I have to wait before asking you when you want your observations? And also, how closely aligned in time do you want these observations? When you're scheduling your commensal telescope, I don't know what I'm doing. When you're scheduling your commensal telescope, remember longitude issues. If you're observing with parks and you observe first thing in the day in parks when it's low in the eastern sky, MWA can't observe that source yet. And also, if you want to do something commensal with CHIME, remember that there is nothing that CHIME can see that the MWA can see. And let me know dates and times as soon as possible when you do find out when you have your commensal observation scheduled. So in summary, what I need to see is the source, your observing requirements, and any constraints you have. And remember that I'm not part of your research area. I'm not even a radio astronomer. And the more you can tell me about what you want, the more likely you are to get what you want. And most importantly, after I schedule your observations, I'll send you a list with a link to all of the observations that I've scheduled. Please look at it and go through and make sure it's okay. This semester, I managed to schedule all of Dilpreet's pulsar observations in correlator mode. And I now have to reschedule them all. So I didn't notice that when I checked the observations. Dilpreet didn't notice it when she checked it. But the more you can catch errors like that on my part, the more likely you are to have successful data. And that's it.
Thank you, Andrew. It's very clear. Any questions for Andrew? Yes, John. Oh, okay, Natasha first.
Thanks, Andrew. It was just a very super quick comment, actually. Just that the AstroPlan observing package is really, really useful for this stuff. And I've used it extensively, especially when working out, can I see this with this telescope at this site at the same time, at this time of year, etc. So AstroPlan if you use Python.
Also, all of the information in Andrew's talk is available on the wiki page that he created entitled How to Write a Good Observing Proposal. So if you missed any of the information in this talk, that is where you should go.
And that should be linked to on the call for proposals, I think.
I also had a look at Dilpreet's summary observations and didn't notice it wasn't in VCF. Don't feel too bad. You're in a big crowd. And also, you should double check AstroPlan because it nearly killed a load of my observations a while back, but it was a while back, so they probably fixed it all now. And also, just to continue blathering on about my ignorance, I was working with MWA for probably about 3 or 4 months before I realized that course channel numbers weren't in megahertz. Should we just ditch them altogether and just talk about megahertz rather than course channels? For everyone in this room, it's fine. But if we're supposed to be an instrument that people can come along and use, I think it's a level of abstraction which isn't really useful.
The problem is in scheduling, we have 24 fixed course channels, and people might not want to specify them in megahertz if they're trying to specify all 24. Certainly, if somebody gives me, I'd like to observe at 300 megahertz, then I'll just work it out. But if they want anything more complicated than a single 30 megahertz band, it's probably best if they express that in channel.
Thank you very much. Please give Andrew another round of applause. Our next talk comes online. It's Greg Sleap. Can you hear us, Greg?
Yes, I can certainly hear you. I'm just going to get my presentation up.
Fantastic. I believe Mia is going to control the alerting you to when your time's running out.
Yes.
Okay.
All
I
right.
can see your slides now, so take it away.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Sammy. So hi, my name is Greg Sleap, and I'm the MWA Data Manager. So I just wanted to say that I am really sorry that I'm not there in person. The biggest FOMO that I've experienced so far is hearing about MWA cupcakes that I missed. So that's a real bummer. But it's also a shame to not catch up with a whole bunch of people who I have met in person. And in fact, the first time I met most of the people in the MWA collaboration was in 2016 in the Perth project meeting, which was my second day working at Curtin. So yes, so that was a real eye-opening experience. I've really enjoyed hearing about all the love the archive has been getting at the project meeting so far. It really, I guess, confirms why I love my job so much, which is basically making all this data available to all of you guys who can do amazing science with it. So thank you all for the love that that the archive has gotten this time. And also, I do apologise in advance if I go into a coughing fit during this talk. I'll try to mute if that happens, but I've just got a bit of a cold and a cough at the moment. All right, anyway, on to the talk. So first, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm presenting today, which is the Pangarang people, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'm located currently just a few k's south of Wangaratta, which is in Victoria. And the name Wangaratta actually means long-necked cormorant in the Pangarang language. And that's one of them just shown there on the right-hand side. So this is what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So I'll just get straight into it. I actually had to cull my talk massively because when I did my first run through thinking that, oh yeah, 15 minutes is a long time, I'm going to have a lot of time left over, it turns out that my talk was about 30 minutes. So I've cut a lot out, unfortunately, but well, there should be something in there for everyone. So most importantly, another theme of this project meeting has been about people. And so I wanted to really emphasize that we've got two great new starters working for us at the moment in the software team. So we've got Maureen Rajendran and Chitru Shrestha. Both of them started in May, and between them, they've got about 2 decades of software engineering experience, both in front-end web development and also back-end. So they're currently getting stuck into the MWA ASVO development and support at the moment. And so you should see over the next few months anyway, quite a few new features, enhancements, bug fixes, and all that sort of stuff. And just on the right-hand side of the slide there is the existing team that I lead. And the I guess the top 3 things that they do, although all of us tend to wear many hats, but in terms of MWA, that's what most of the things that everyone works on. So just an update about the archive volume and where we're at the moment. So currently we're sitting at 48.7 petabytes out of a total of 57.4. The 57.4 is actually an increase by 7.4 petabytes from this time last year, and that's due to Pawsey and ARDC providing extra storage for us for the ARDC collections. So these are the collections of national significance, of which we put in for 5 of them and got all of them funded, which is good. So those collections can be found by going to the ASVO website and going about collections. And those collections are immune from deletion. So we'll basically keep those collections for as long as we have the archive. So as you can see, we've got a bit free, which is good. However, an observing semester can easily rack up 8 petabytes or so. So we'll be, unless we get new funding from the funding fairy, we'll probably end up having to run some more deletion rounds, which I'll talk about in a bit. So this is the, I guess, the overview of the archive from the beginning until now and what the current volume is. This actually excludes data that has been deleted. If you included data that was deleted, then we've ingested over 61.9 petabytes in the history of the MWA. And you can see some of the turning points in the growth of the archive being phase 2, where we increased the data rate by 4 times due to the long baselines and having to do higher resolution correlator modes. And also MWAX being commissioned and kicking off some new semesters for late last year and this year. So this is, I guess, just the overview of the whole archive and which projects are taking up what amount of data. As usual, the other slice of the pie is the biggest. There's lots of smaller projects out there that add up to quite a lot. You can see the biggest one apart from that is the Gleam, which also includes GleamX. You've got solar and then the smart survey, FRBs with the MWA, which is basically also a bit of a catch-all for BCS observations, and our calibration project, which is where all the calibrators, like morning and evening calibrators, go. So that's racking up quite a bit as well. And so now let's take a trip down memory lane. So I will say that my usual slides being big blocks of text may trick you into thinking that suddenly I've got some extra skills, but I actually got a little bit of help on the technique of this timeline, as you'll see soon, from my partner Megan. So kudos to her, and let's get stuck into it. So prior to 2013, so see the fancy effect there.
Don't know if you heard that big woo from the crowd, Greg. But
I felt it. I felt it. So, and I will actually also say that I'm going through some history here that I wasn't part of, and so I've pieced together this information from emails, from chats with people over the years, some foggy recollections. So if I've got any of the dates wrong here, then please forgive me. Once we get to 2016, which is when I started work, the history is a bit more accurate. But it should give you an idea anyway of how we sort of got to where we are now. So as I mentioned before, prior to 2013, we're in 32T. Data was pretty much provided, stored, I guess, and transported via sneakernet. So basically without any sort of networking. So basically shipping disks. And I've put Andrew Williams here. So throughout these set of slides, I'm basically putting some key people who are part of the data and archiving side of things. And I count Andrew amongst that because Andrew's always been very supportive and has contributed a lot throughout the whole of the MWA with helping out with the archive stuff. But initially it was the ICRA UWA Data Intensive Astronomy team, plus Curtin in the form of Dave Pallett, who began work on NGAS and the archive and working with Pawsey and benchmarking the ingest of data into the archive at Pawsey. And I guess working with Pawsey to troubleshoot all the bugs and problems with the tape system. So the other two members of the DIA team there are Chen Wu and Andreas Wignack. And so we move on to 2013, which was a big year. So by the end of 2013, we had a petabyte of data in the can. Phase 1 began in July, and we were at 128T. Science started, yay. And the NGAS and the Pawsey archive were deployed around that time as well. The Galaxy supercomputer was commissioned at Pawsey as well, and Galaxy would be the supercomputer that MWA and then later ASCAP were using primarily until actually I think on the 1st of August this year, Galaxy will be turned off for the last time, decommissioned, which is a bit sad. Also, the first VCS testing observations occurred as well. So we now go to 2014, and 2014, OBS download was developed. So Dave Pallett wrote a tool to make it easier for astronomers to download the data. NGAS mirrors of some of the data were established in the USA, in Australia and New Zealand as well. And now I'm not sure about these next two dates here. The 10 gig link to Pawsey was established from the MRO, and Cotter was developed by Andre Offringer, and was obviously a very important part of the pre-processing of MWA data until Beely came along. So 2015, I could not find a thing that happened in 2015. So I just basically, I did end up finding one thing, which was that voltdownload.py was developed, which was the equivalent to OBS download, but for voltage data, which was only really used by the VCS team. And so I figured that everyone must have been busy sciencing during 2015, which is why there were no other events of note that I know about. So if you do think of anything, then please, mention it in the question time or in the chat. But we hit about 10 petabytes at that point. 2016 is when I started. So now history gets a little bit more accurate. And we began a ASVO design study. So this was basically to try to provide a platform where the general public, as well as MWA members, could download data. So up until that point, the OBS download script was only available via the MWA tools repository, which was sort of restricted to MWA members only. So there was no easy way to download MWA data if you're not part of the collaboration. We also started looking at the collaboration management design. So that's things like membership management, wiki, mailing lists, all that sort of stuff. 2017, there's a lot of stuff that happened at the MRO. So we deployed 6 new Arch boxes. I'm probably running out of time, so I will skip through and only mention the really super duper important ones. So the MWA ASVO version 1 launched, and so that was the first time that we actually had a publicly available data that was easy to download by the public. Now, it was still raw visibilities and uncalibrated, but it was a start, and it meant that people outside the collaboration could suddenly easily access data. We also launched our VO services. And at this point, we had 19 petabytes in the can. Okay, so we also had Hassan Ryan help us with some ASVO development. And ASVO version 2 was deployed, and that provided the very basic calibration feature. So the calibration isn't super duper like a black belt would do. However, it was good enough for the general public to use so that they didn't need to be a black belt to get calibrated data out of the MWA. All right, I'm going to have to speed through this now. We started to deploy our AWS stuff. So that was basically getting a whole bunch of servers that were physical and on premises and getting them into AWS instead. We'd hit 35 petabytes at this point. Harrison Barlow was hired at this point, and Garawala's supercomputer was commissioned. We did a bunch of deletions of bad and redundant data. We'll keep going. So in 2021, we hired Dev Null, and Beely development began. And we also commissioned MWAX. In 2022, we hired Luke Williams, and the archive reached 42 petabytes, barely reached feature parity with Cotter, and we released version 3 of ASVO, which was basically a migration to using HPC, allowing voltage downloads, and a migration to the new Pawsey long-term storage system. We also hit 136 tiles. And finally, this year, we've got Chitru and Morian started. Fringe stopping, which hopefully will reduce the data rates for our future observing seasons. And we hit 144T. And so just now quickly onto probably something important, which is that in order to sort of do a trial run of our data retention policy and a delete round, we're going to be providing information in the form of some wiki pages, which will show the deletions that the principal scientists and myself have come up with. We've selected a petabyte of data, which we believe is the oldest, least useful data. And so all that information will be up on wiki pages. We're just currently fiddling with the formatting of them at the moment. But in a week or two's time, we'll send out something, and that will kick off the 4-week consultation process, where if you think that we are targeting something that is important, you could actually request from the director that stuff not be deleted. So as per the policy that we've gone through several times before. And this is just a bit of a showcase of the user interface we've created. If you're a PI, you'll have a new button in ASVO where you can select some observations and create a deletion request, and that deletion request will then go into the list for the next round of deletions. It's very basic, and if you have a more complicated list of observations, then just send us an email. This basically allows you to self-report. So if you know that there's bad data because you've processed it, this is a great way for you to let us know about that so that we can delete stuff that we know is bad rather than having to find data that's bad. And there's a whole bunch of things that are going to be happening with ASVO. I don't have time to go into all of it, but the most important thing is that Garawala is hitting end of life in June 2024. And in December, we're losing the Astro file system. So we'll have to make some changes to the ASVO to accommodate that. And I just wanted to say one last thing, which is that we've had invaluable partners through this journey with the archive, which has involved mainly these 5 groups here, which help us constantly and make it possible to do what we do. Thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Great. Any questions? We've got maybe good time for just one question from the audience. Ramesh.
Quick one, Greg. Thanks very much for that summary. So from your presentation, I get an impression that for data retention of very past projects or old projects, now the process is going to be like a relatively simpler in the sense that you and principal scientist will let us know which data and when, and we just have to make a case and not something much more than that. Is that going to be the case? Or I'm just trying to clarify the procedure and when we should be like looking for or expecting that sort of things coming from you so that we can plan things in.
Yeah, great question, Ramesh. So the way that it's designed at the moment is that the directorate will nominate based on advice, I guess, from myself about the state of the archive volume and also the current semester's TAC proposals that have been approved. And we'll calculate all that and work out if we actually need to make room before a semester starts or during a semester. So most of the time it will happen around the beginning of a semester once the TAC proposals have come in. So this round that's coming up is really just a test run, sort of I guess a a dress rehearsal. I mean, we really are going to be removing some data, but it's only 1 petabyte. And it's just to sort of get everyone used to the process, including us as well. Because one thing that the principal scientists and I have found is that going through and actually determining what is low value data is actually very difficult. So any help that that PIs can give us with data that they know is not going to be useful to anyone, please let us know. And I will point out that a few people have already done that, and so thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg. It's you're a bona fide radio astronomer when you say only 1 petabyte of data. All right.
Very
thank you.
true.
Thank you. Another round of applause for Greg, please. And finally, we have Dev Null.
No. Good to go, I think. That's all right. People don't need to see my face.
It does it and then
Stay.
yes.
We'll replace you.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for making it to the last talk of the day. My name's Dev Null. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm going to be talking about how MWA calibration techniques have evolved over the decade that we've been in operation. I hope you've all held on to your beam models because we'll be using them as a visual tool to understand where the shape of the beam comes from. So, maybe get them out of your bag. I forgot mine. I wrote that before I left, but I forgot mine. Yes. So as Randall mentioned on day one, real-time calibration is the holy grail for MWA. But calibration is still a challenge, even after more than 10 years of progress. I remember when I first started in 2021, it took me months to make my first calibrated image. And that massive barrier to entry still exists today. In 2020, Marcin Sokolowski et al. Brought us the ASVO calibration pipeline, which was a big step forward in this goal. But the calibration technique it uses is pretty out of date and has a lot of room for improvement. MWA operations team is working to improve our ASVO calibration pipeline using the many innovations that have come from several science teams over the years. So having better first pass calibration solutions will enable us to do a bunch of things. One major advantage is it will allow us to take advantage of the new MWAX fringe stopping correlator modes. These will undoubtedly have better effectiveness if they have accurate cable length before the channels are averaged together. And we need to calibrate, we need to know the cable lengths from calibration to do that. Also, the same thing goes for, we'll also be able to use the calibration solutions for QA, which for flagging tiles that are actually misbehaving, and fault finding, so we can go and fix them. If we have good calibration solutions, we'll be able to do basic imaging and cell calibration as well. It's kind of the barrier that we have to be able to automate that on all of our observations, because unlike calibration, imaging is like pretty well figured out relatively. So another
problem it might address is the problem we have with the archive, where certain science groups would prefer to average observations together that they would otherwise delete. So yeah, and of course it makes MWA data accessible to more than just the black belts. So yeah, a lot of advantages. What is calibration? Yeah, it's just taking your raw uncalibrated interferometric visibilities are not very useful for science because they have the complex way that the instrument and its environment imprint themselves into the signal. The key to removing these imprints involves applying a detailed understanding of how the instrument sees the sky in order to remove these imprints. Calibration usually involves simulating what we expect the visibility to look like and determining what adjustments should be made to each antenna to unlock useful information contained within. Sounds simple, right? Of course not. If you want to fully calibrate MWA data, there are so many complex challenges you need to deal with. I'll mostly be focusing on one of these, which is direction-independent calibration. But this area alone is a massive topic to cover. So if I've missed anything, please bring it up at question time. I want to make sure that we get a complete record of the last 10 years of calibration innovations. So why is calibrating the MWA so hard? One of the main drivers behind MWA's design is to explore the high redshift universe. This means that we need to be sensitive to wavelengths on the order of a few meters. That increases our sensitivity to ionospheric effects, which vary across regions of the sky and proportional to lambda squared. It also happens to be the same part of the spectrum as high-powered broadcasts like digital TV, FM, satellites, and aircraft. We have a wide field of view, so this means that we need to model the sky in much more detail than most other radio telescopes. And we also have different signal paths that the signal travels through before it's digitized in some cases, which means that some tiles are more sensitive to environmental effects than others. And there is other implications for this that I'll get into. So our new MWAX correlator can correlate more than 10,000 baselines from 100, currently is correlating more than 10,000 baselines from 144 tiles, and it supports modes that produce up to 20 gigabytes per second of data. So this means that the data needs to be processed with efficient algorithms on powerful computers. We also, so I'll skip that as well. So much of our understanding of the MWA beam comes from the work that Adrian Zotinger and Marcin Sokolowski did between 2014 and 2017. But what did people use before this? We can get a pretty good approximation analytically, and this is described in a lot more detail in Zotinger 2015. But given that the beam seems to be a pretty strong theme for this meeting, I thought I'd include this formulation over to the left, if you're curious. On the right, I've plotted the individual dipole response for the FEE beam, not the analytic beam, the FEE beam, just because I ran out of time and it's really easy to do with hyperbeam. So there you go, some basic trig and a little bit of complex linear algebra, you get something really pretty. If you want to iterate on this, you need complicated and expensive electrical engineering software. And so, yeah, that's what Adrian and Marcin did, around 2016, and they gave us the FEE beam. So there's some clever tricks that were used to avoid having to simulate every single individual element for the entire tile at once. There's a trick that where you can model the response of a single dipole, and yes, lots of cool trickery there. And a lot of work has been done, like by Jack Lyons et al. To validate the beam using OrbCom constellation, the satellite constellation, and that's been done down to elevation roughly 10 degrees. But Catherine Elder's talk the other day shows that even the FEE beam might not have the full picture. Yes, so let's talk a little bit about polarimetry as well, because that gives us, those formulations kind of gives you the broad strokes of the shape of the beam, but there's a lot more going on to the beam than just its shape. So obviously we can't make a 3D model of this, but it'd be pretty cool if we could. But if we wanted to, we'd need to just account for how the beam, how the tile sees different parts of the sky, and how the projection from the basis of the sky onto the instrument basis kind of changes the angle that the tile sees the light in. So if we don't account for this angle correctly, if our beam model doesn't perfectly take this into account, then we see false polarization. So we might, yeah. Now let's talk about the sky models. So back in 2013, this is a selection of some of the main catalogs that were available back then. Some of these might look pretty complete, but just remember that they cover a pretty narrow range of frequencies, and most of these are outside the range that MWA can observe. So with the exception of the brightest few sources in the sky, an astronomer, MWA user in 2013, might have been able to get enough information to extrapolate the flux of a couple of sources, but I don't know how, yeah, it would have been very challenging. Luckily, over the last decade, a bunch of surveys like GLEAM, GLEAMX, and others have filled in many of the gaps in our point source models. But of course, having the bias of being in the EUR team as well, it is worth mentioning that lobes is very important to be able to calibrate on shorter baselines, which is because shorter baselines resolve extended sources a little bit more. So you can't just get away with subtracting point sources away, you need extended sources. So these detailed models that have been built up over the years have enabled us to do some more advanced calibration techniques that I'll talk about. So one catalog that one methodology for catalogs that I came across researching this talk is one by Jaden Cook. And I found it quite interesting because instead of it does a lot of cool stuff. Instead of just the typical spectral index that a lot of catalogs have, it has a polylogarithmic fitting that it does. And there's a lot of benefits to it. I had a whole slide on it, but I'll probably just skip over it now because I'm running out of time. But yes, it does a lot of cool stuff. If we wanted to make a single catalog to rule them all, why not include polarimetry information in it as well? Is that a naive, silly idea? Discuss in the question section, because I'm quite interested in what that might give us if we were able to include polarimetry in our catalogs. So let's talk about the software. So no talk about MWA calibration is complete without mentioning the RTS. Back in 2007, a 512 tile MWA was being planned. This would have produced a volume of data that is overwhelming even by today's standards. And for context, it's the same number of tiles or stations as SKA low is planned to be built. So the solution to this was to build a real-time GPU-accelerated ionospheric calibration and wide-field imaging pipeline to distribute the processing across a cluster of GPUs. Since only a handful of technicians would ever be able to use this, need to use the system, very little priority was given on making a usable system, and instead the focus was on cool optimizations to make it run faster at the cost of readability. As we all know, as we know in retrospect, this was an incredibly ambitious idea. And given the beam model and sky models that were available at the time. By the time the MWA was descoped to 128T, it had become feasible to store the visibilities and just process them offline, kind of making the whole thing a little bit redundant. So several alternative pipelines that were much slower but easier to use started being developed and gaining popularity. So RTS has been deprecated in favor of hyperdrive effectively at the moment. But its many innovations live on in other pipelines. So two of the main ones, there's a lot, but two of the main ones that it popularized are MICHCAL, also known as alternating direction implicit, basically just an algorithm for direction independent calibration. And another cool thing that is the position-based source finder that I gave a talk on at the MWA project meeting a year ago. So if you want to learn a little bit more about DDCal, direction-dependent calibration, that's worth looking at. So onto the next bit of software. So FHD was first described in 2012 by Ian Sullivan. So Nicole has already covered this in a talk yesterday, so I'll very quickly run through FHD and direct anyone to that talk or to one of the many authors attending this meeting from the list on the right, if you want to know more. So it does a lot more than just calibration, and this list barely scratches the surface, but it has many interesting departures from the RTS. So what sets, other than its holographic approach to deconvolution, what sets FHD apart from the RTS is its thorough treatment of sensitive systematics like Capel reflections and many other things. Because the RTS needed to run in real time, many of the calibration steps apply to visibilities averaged across an entire course channel, but instead, FHD is able to take its sweet time and just calibrate every channel in the band. Also, many pipelines would simply usually discard the autocorrelations. FHD has a cool trick that uses the autocorrelations to improve their calibration accuracy. It was developed independently to the RTS, the FHD was developed independently to the RTS so that results could be cross-validated by multiple independent pipelines within the EUR team. So unfortunately, even though it's open source, you can't just run FHD without an IDL license. But Nicole and Jack Line are working with a team from ADAX to address this by porting it to Python, and there's some promising results should be coming soon. Next, we have the MWA Reduce Calibrate pipeline, one of Andre Offringer's many contributions to MWA software. So all the way back in 2012 was the first commit. And it was actually based on, some of the code was based on the MWA tools repo, which has a very big author list. Some of the people are there. Didn't have room to fit everyone on, but there's a lot of authors who contributed to MWA tools. Yeah, that goes all the way back to 2009. There was some work to get GPU acceleration working on it. I've never been able to get that working. I'm not sure where the progress is there, but I just don't think it works. But yeah, there hasn't been much activity on it recently. It still works, obviously, but it hasn't had a commit since 2022, maybe people working on a different branch or something. And then finally, we have CASA. So unlike the previous calibration suites, none of the contributors are in this room, so I can say whatever I want. CASA is a wildly popular software suite for radio astronomy. In my experience using it, it's very buggy and very slow, but it can get the job done sometimes. Many early MWA projects were calibrated using CASA's Fourier transform. I'm running out of time. Hyperdrive takes the best aspects of the previous pipelines, wraps them up into an efficient, well-documented, and well-tested calibration suite that runs a variety of hardware configurations. Yes, it runs We've tested it on Photonics and Garawala. It also works on the CPU. You've heard a lot about hyperdrive this meeting, so I'm going to have to. So much of my talk left to do. This is the calibration pipeline that we had in 2020. It's based on taking images that we're taking with the VLA and MOST. It uses the CASA FT calibration. And one of the cool things is it stores the calibration solutions in the MWA database, but not the entire calibration solutions, just the delay, which is the linear fit on the phase, and second order polynomial gain for each course channel. This is pretty useful for quality analysis because you can just do a SQL query and you can very easily analyze historical calibration solutions. It doesn't calibrate all observations. We can do better. So how would we do that? We replace CAS with hyperdrive. We use a modern calibration catalog. So thanks, Kat Ross, for walking me through how the Gleam GSM model works. It's not a published Gleam thing. It's in the Gleam repo though. So Greg Sleap has developed the framework for this by making doing the pre-processing in near real time. So downloading the visibility for the calibrator straight off as soon as they're ready. And we had to fit Samuel McSweeney, thank you for helping me develop the magic Fourier fitting. I wish I could go into this a bit more. We also had to fit the phase offset between the RI and NI receivers. Jake Jones helped with that. These are Jake Jones's plots. And how does it do? You tell me. So this is, I had a slide explaining what all these plots are, but I had to skip it. The top left, we have the standard kind of view of what we think it should be seeing, the MWA should be seeing. Just to the left of that, you can ignore that. The plots, all of the rest of the squares on the left side of the screen are a typical phase plot for a calibration solution. You have a phase is your y-axis, and your frequency is the x-axis, and that's going from I think it's like 80 to 220 megahertz. I had it on the previous slide, and this is just the x's, and the red dots are the blue dots are data, and the red dots are the fit, and so typically you would only do a calibrator observation when the sun is down, and at the start of the day and the end of the day. We're doing it every day for years, but in this case we've got a calibrator observation every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes, it's pointing to a calibrator, avoiding the sun, putting the sun in the nulls, which is difficult when you've got a very large observing band. The plots in the top right are regular RI receivers. They are flat over the spectrum, roughly flat because it means that the delay that we're fitting is pretty okay. In the middle, we've got some different flavored tiles that have longer cables. These longer cables are more sensitive to temperature. So as the sun sets, it gets cooler and the cable length seems to decrease. On the bottom right is a plot from the NI receivers. These are each of these plots has 8 or so tiles, and they're plotted over time. So this is the delay plotted over time. This should be flat. It's not. We figured out what might be happening is this might be explained by the fact that the NI receivers are on a different clock. So they're on the White Rabbit clock, and the RI receivers on a haystack clock, and they might be out of sync. So thanks.
We are a bit over, but do we have time for a question? Yeah.
The bus will wait for us. Come on.
Okay, questions, quick discussion.
Also, Dev is here like tomorrow as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't feel like you need to rush questions now. Let it percolate. So
That's true.
Just have a think about what this might be and chat to me tomorrow.
Yep. But are there any comments right now, real quick?
short ones.
Short ones.
We're all just
Okay.
ignore Dev. Yeah, I think that's probably. Thank you so
All right,
much.
can we thank everybody in this session?